Okay, everyone, welcome back. I'll apologize up front. I am getting over being sick earlier this week, so I've been telling people I'm at a solid 90%. So we'll see how far 90% gets me today. Okay, long list of updates of cool stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff. So first and foremost, latest Visual Studio is out. So stream time. Welcome back, Jared. I've never about 25%. So latest Visual Studio dropped. It worth noting for people who caught my stream 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we ran into the issue of when SDK 6.0.302, I believe, dropped. There was a bug in WPF where if you used a project that had source generators, you just failed because the source generators were being added double. That bug fix is not in the latest update. So same fix as before. There's a little targets thing for people who want to see here. 17.0. That is a good question. Let me just launch mine because I literally finished installing it about 45 minutes ago. So 17.4 is the preview that's out. I think the non-preview is 17.3. So 17.4.0 preview 1, typically what happens is as soon as they release a full release, the preview versions immediately bump to the vNext, just because reasons. So these things I imagine are probably very close to in sync, with the exception that the preview 1 obviously has preview features turned on. And yes, it will be a WPF night. So I run the preview builds because I like playing with preview features, and at least while streaming, I'm not too concerned with bugs, but as you saw, I have both versions installed because occasionally the preview builds, stuff just breaks, and occasionally I just need a stable dev environment to go back to, so I have them both. You can have them side by side. They do work just fine. Vardo explicit versions are always edit. That is a great question. I do not know. So I haven't been over the release notes too closely. From what I saw, MAUI was the big announcement, is rather than having to be on a preview VS to have the built-in templates for MAUI, it's now just in the box. Huzzah. It's been GA for a while. I don't know why Visual Studio took so long. Yeah, there's some small quality of life improvement stuff in here, but not... again, there's just little things like highlighting your selection. Huzzah. All-in-one search. Huzzah. And a lot of these things here, I sometimes miss when they get released because these things have been on in the preview one for a while. So, yeah, I can agree with that that statement, that there didn't seem like there's anything that new in here. Yeah, it's a lot of little quality of life stuff. I will say the enumerable visualizer, I ran into this one the other day just kind of by accident and went, oh, that was kind of nice. But it's one of those, until you're inspecting an enumerable in your debugger. So there is that. Another thing that dropped, GitKraken 8.8.0. So I realize it's hiding behind my picture. I'll move it up. There, right there. 8.8.0 dropped. The cool thing, so for people who care, so there's a whole list here. I'll just release notes if anyone cares. So there's single sign-in, which is kind of cool. Workspace, kind of cool. This one here, partial stash. This one makes me really excited. So before in GitKraken, all you could do is stash all pending changes. And so you kind of got into this state where you would manipulate your pending changes just so that you could stash. And it's like, ugh. Now what you can do is you can just go file by file, or select multiple files and stash those and pop those. So it makes it a little bit easier if you are frequent stashing. Like if all you do is stash to switch off to go work on something else and then come back and pop, not a big deal, right? Doing the whole thing is what you do most of the time anyway. But occasionally it is nice to be able to stash like subgroups of changes. So that is now, there is now a GUI for it. Yeah, and obviously you could always do it on the command line if you wanted to. Lots of UI updates. Nothing that got me overly excited. The SSO stuff got me really excited. This one will only affect you if you are on Teams or Enterprise. If you are on just an individual account, even if it's Pro, this doesn't affect you. So this is more around people with bigger teams being able to easily manage groups of users, which is what excited me, because there are some companies where it's very nice to be able to have, say, an AAD group where you can put all your users in. So I was going through the docs on this. I may end up just doing a side video on setting this up at some point, because this actually really interests me in doing this, and their docs look fairly good, but I don't know, I make videos. So there's that. Okay, update. One last update. So anybody who was following my Scuridae project from the last 2 streams, that is now out and it is actually working. So let's see. I can almost spell the name of my own project. Very close. So for anybody who was tracking the last couple streams, this is now out and working. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Jared, thank you for following. Though I'm surprised you weren't already. I got the auth plugged in, so there's HMAC authentication for updating releases. I got the CLI app in a very nice working situation. I added auth to the API using Azure AD for creating new apps, so that anybody can't just arbitrarily add new apps to my server, because I didn't want that to happen. New Twitch account. Sorry for the distraction. You're good, Jared. So all of that is in and working, and the Simply Budget test app that I was playing with actually ran through and worked great. I was rather impressed. He doesn't follow until after he gets to be on stream with somebody. I mean, that's a really slow way to add followers, but if that's what it takes, sure. So, but this is out, so if people are interested in it, there are still lots of to-dos and a handful of hard-coded things and a few places where I know channel isn't being appropriately used and all that jazz. So I want to clean this up, but my hope is that the next stream that I do on this will probably be hey, here's how I add apps to my installer stuff, because I got it down to where it's darn stupid simple. Like, after the setup is done, and I realize that I am hand waving over a big amount of work, but once the setup's done and the NuGet package is added, you run .NET publish and you're done. And that does everything. It gens the new installer files, calls the server to update the release, publishes the artifacts, it does all the stuff. And I went, oh, I like this. I like this. That means in my pipeline, it's really easy. So, was really happy about where that landed. Okay, now on to other stuff. So, a very long time ago, like around July 18th, 2019, I made a video, and I've pointed several people to this video because I go over the basics of MVVM and WPF. You can probably tell by my dirty office background, and this door no longer exists, and yeah, all of this stuff. This is now kind of dead and gone. But this video covers a lot of the basics in MVVM and WPF, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the content in this video, aside from the fact that it's really, really dated. Like, really dated. And specifically, at the time, I was using MVVM Lite, because that was my MVVM library of choice. And since then, there's been a handful of times where I've pointed people to the Microsoft MVVM Toolkit, which is a wonderful library. And it is, I believe I've told people that it's the spiritual successor to what MVVM Lite was. It was built from that API and has been redone multiple times over. It's been great. But I've been wanting to build an update to this for a while because there's a lot of advancements that have come. So specifically, if you're familiar with the Microsoft MVVM toolkit, this is great. And the one thing that bothers me is this thing's now technically deprecated, but you won't get it if you land on the basic page here. What is out now and what they have renamed it in. So if you go here and you just follow the NuGet package, you end up here, and at least in NuGet, they did mark it as deprecated and legacy. It's no longer being maintained. Don't let this big scary thing scare you. What they did is they renamed their NuGet package. So it's no longer Microsoft.toolkit.mvvm. It's now communitytoolkit.mvvm. For whatever reason, I don't know if there was some back and forth with Microsoft or what the deal was. Because the people managing this largely work for Microsoft. Like you'll note, Microsoft Toolkit. Right? And there's a good method-to-method table of what methods from light map to the toolkit methods, which is helpful. Sorry, I must be out of context for that comment. I will trust you. So what I would like to do is actually go through and do a similar getting started with WPF and MVVM, but doing it with the new Community Toolkit MVVM package. So for those people who are interested, here is the handy dandy link. Let me fix the localization on it. Boom. This is the docs on it for people who are interested. And the most exciting thing about it, or I should say one of the cool exciting things about it, here's the announcement. So this 8.0 release, this blog post came out on the 4th. So this is fairly new. So if you haven't seen it, don't panic. It hasn't been out for that long. I've known it's been coming for a while, but this thing is, we'll wash that. Clean that up a little bit. But this is a fairly recent announcement of what they've done. And a lot of what is built in here is heavily powered by source generators. So which is both good and bad. It means when you're writing apps, the amount of code you have to write is a lot smaller. The drawback is that means there's magic, and I kind of want to explain the magic so that people understand what things are going on here, right? And so they kind of call out the libraries that are in here. We're going to focus on the MVVM one. At some other point, we could double back for like high performance or whatnot if people find that stuff interesting. But that's what tonight will be, is an introduction to MVVM for people who may be new to this. And then for people who are already fairly familiar with it, there's going to be a lot of stuff in here covering the new library and what I would say are cool updates to normal patterns if you're building MVVM libraries. So let's start with, there's a good migration guide of what the equivalent methods are. Thank you. Migrating from MVVM Lite. Perfect. I will save this link and add it to the YouTube description later. And I believe for the most part, the upgrade up to the Community Toolkit is fairly easy. I think a lot of it is namespaces and similar. So not overly problematic, but it is a major release update. Okay, so for people who are just getting started, let's go through. We're gonna just spin a brand new WPF application. So WPF app next. App 7, that sounds great. And yes, we will use net 6, and away we go. So for people who haven't heard the phrase MVVM before, what it stands for is Model View View Model. And the idea here is segregation of what code goes where. So the view is your XAML. So in the basic app where you have a window, this XAML guy, this main window class, this is the view. And the code behind the C# file that goes with the XAML is also part of the view. And you could certainly go through. You do not need to build a WPF app with MVVM. You do not. It is highly recommended, and you'll see some people online going as far as to say required, because there are certain features inside of WPF that are really built to take advantage of it. Things like binding to a list of objects is so much easier with MVVM versus writing all that code yourself. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Now, with that said, you'll note there's a view, and you'll note the other two things. Model and view model don't exist here. And this is the unfortunate part, is when WPF shipped, those things weren't really in the box. So the idea is, and what we're going to focus on tonight, is the view model and the view. The model itself is usually what you can think of like database access, maybe services, downstreamy stuff that your app uses. And for this, we're going to focus on just building out view and view model, because oftentimes that's where people struggle the most getting started. So step one, first of all, we're going to update this template to latest C#, and we're just going to clean some stuff up. Let's see, spin Karnak too. So for anybody who's not familiar with it, file scope namespace, and then once you do that, you can literally just delete all the usings. That's wonderful. Okay, so we have this. And we have our XAML thing here. So the first thing we need is we need a view model class. So we are just going to spin a basic class called main window view model. Okay. And then we're just going to move it into its own file, and away we go. Okay, and we will do public string first name. See that? Oh, look at you go, Copilot. You're actually writing useful code for me. Copilot, now admittedly, I was sick and taking cold medication, but Copilot was impressing me. And maybe it was the medication, maybe it was Copilot being awesome, or maybe it was a combination, but it was rather impressive, some of the suggestions it was coming up with. Okay, so we've got a first name property, and now the question is this link between it. Now, a couple things I'm going to call out. A lot of times when people are talking about MVVM, you will hear people say, oh, don't put anything in your code behind. This is bad. That is, in my opinion, wrong. The code behind file is very valid to be used. That's what it's there for. It's designed to put code behind your view. So if you need to register for an event, like hypothetically, if you want to do something when the window is loaded, right? That's fine. Write some code in here. The important part is that the code that's in this code behind is view code. So everything here should be related to the view, the way your application looks, works when somebody touches it and clicks on it and punches it. Hopefully they aren't physically punching it. That code lives here. The moment we start talking about the logic of what should happen when they do that. So like when somebody taps on a button, what should that do? Well, that's now moving into view model territory. And the idea is view code is really hard to test. And I will emphasize this. One of the big advantages of MVVM is testability. And some people will hate me for saying this. If you aren't writing tests, you're missing out on part of the benefits of MVVM. Right? Because if you aren't writing tests, you can slap everything in the code behind, and the whole reason for segregating it is because the view code is nearly impossible to test. To actually test a UI object requires like an STA thread and rendering pipeline, and there's whole libraries built around testing UI objects. It's hard, it's clunky, it's not fast, and most of the time what you want to do is write tests around your logic. When the user clicks the submit button, does it send the username and password to my service? Great, that sounds like a test I want to write, but if that's all coupled inside of like a button click handler in here, that's not easy for me to test. Hey, Papa Shell, thank you for the follow. Now, once we get into the view model and start segregating that logic out, view models are designed to be testable. And there's kind of this blurry line a little bit. So a view model's job is to support the view. Whatever your view needs to function in terms of data, your view model should serve that up and make it pretty for the view. That's its job. Its job is to support the view. The view model should be agnostic of the view though. So Oftentimes I'll see people do things where they leak data from their view model up to their view. So you'll note I did something like first name here. If you see something like public int window width, right? There's that. Or if I do public, what's another bad one that I occasionally see slip in? Thickness, right? Button padding, right? Write perfect code equals no test needed. Correct. In both of these cases, well, for example, in the button padding, I've now taken a class that normally lives, like, for example, if you have to have system windows inside of your view model, you might question if that's a good place for it. Because when I expose up something like button padding, I'm now very tightly coupling my view to my view model. Because that property is now making a very strong assumption about how it's going to be used in the view. And so, one, it's got a view type object in here, and it's named very specific for a view. This one up here doesn't have a view type object, it's just an int, but it's still very coupled to what this is. And there is a blurry line here about what's appropriate and what's not. But in general, what I usually tell people is the view model should serve up the data, and then the view may need to massage that data a little bit, ideally as little as possible, but occasionally you want to serve up some information from your view model and let the view do work. For example, colors for theming, right? I oftentimes will say, okay, I may serve up a color in my view model and then use a value converter to convert that color to a brush and use that for a background color elsewhere. Something to that effect. But let's actually show some of this working. So inside of this, we're going to do text block, text, binding, first name. And you'll note right away, so couple features that should be apparent. This doesn't work. But you'll note I'm starting to get a little bit of IntelliSense. So normally I turn the XAML designer off immediately. However, they've started adding some cool features to it that kind of make me reconsider. So you'll note whenever you see the little light bulb or the dots under your code, like what you see in C#, the XAML designer is starting to get some of that same magic, which is pretty cool. So if I go here and you don't have an autocomplete? Oh, come on. One of you guys is supposed to have a light bulb. Let me try compiling real quick and see if it figures it out. I thought it had a light bulb to do it, to auto add it for me. Come on. Where are you? Don't make a liar out of me. Okay. At minimum, it's at least telling me what will happen. So setting the data context will enhance IntelliSense when working with data bindings. Was Copilot a pain to set up? Not really. It was a pain to get into the beta until they kicked it open for everybody, but as far as setting it up, it was pretty simple. I believe it was just an extension add-on. And then I did very little to configure. Okay, so inside of here, a common place to set the data context is right inside of your code behind. So main window view model. And when we talk about MVVM, the data context or the binding context, depending on your framework of choice, this is the context under which all bindings are going to be resolved. So for example, this binding is looking for the property first name. That first name property exists here, and it will be able to look that up because it's going to say, okay, given this binding, look to my binding context or data context, find the property called first name, and assign that into my text property. Great. The thing is, right here, it doesn't actually know. It says no data context found for binding. But if we actually start this app, oh, and I guess, hang on, we should assign that thing a value because right now it's empty string. That's not really a great use case. So first name will be Kevin, because that's the best first name anyone could ever have. Biased opinion. And you'll note, huzzah! Look at that. Binding works. which is great because that's what it was supposed to do. But inside of your XAML designer, what you can do is you can set the d:\data context. So inside of XAML, unlike C# where you have using statements where all of the using statements just import all the things in there, XAML has namespace includes, which is this XML NS, but your namespaces get named. So when you reference something, rather than just typing it in order to disambiguate things, you have to say, hey, I'm using this type from this namespace. And you'll note one of the namespaces has no alias, this colon variable at the end. So things like grid exist in this namespace. But things like this data context property exist in this namespace. And the D one, this is one of the built-in ones that is auto-added for you when you create it. This is largely, you'll see it's referencing expression blend. This is largely around, you can almost think of it as designer, is largely what this is for. And so if we go here, we could go d::design instance, and we could do your close copilot, your close. We can then say, okay, your design instance is first name. And now that the XAML designer knows the data context for the bindings, when I go through and look at this, if I start looking at what is in here, you'll note first name now shows up auto-magically right alongside my other properties, because now the designer has been given some context about what to bind to, which is great. Okay, so let's go through, let's expand this out a little bit. So we're going to do some grid, row definition, boom, boom, boom. Let's do height auto, and then I'm just going to size some stuff. Okay, let's see, vertical alignment, center, horizontal. No, don't help me. You're doing so good. Horizontal alignment, center. See, typing's hard. I'm going to zoom this in. So you can see how this doesn't have a lot of stuff to work with at the moment, like empty. Okay, so let's go through, and we're going to add a button in here as well. And then that's interesting. So you can tell Copilot, not that bright. This isn't valid. Because it's trying to do a binding to an event. No, that Copilot's great. Copilot also occasionally just makes stuff up, which is just awesome. Okay, so we're gonna move this button down here. Okay, the next thing with MVVM, because this text block is great, we can get data out of our view model into our view, but now we want to actually have interaction, because unlike some other patterns like MVC, where it's oftentimes pushing stuff out and then registering for events from the view, there needs to be that interaction coming back from the view into my view model. The user does a thing. And again, it is very valid if we decide that, hey, on mouse enter, I need to do some work. It is okay in your code behind, and I'm going to get rid of this data that data context can stay. It is very okay to do something where I go, oh, okay, let me grab my data context and invoke a method directly on it from an event handler. This is valid. This is very valid, because sometimes the stuff that you need to do inside of like events, or maybe there isn't a nice binding target to work with, it's okay to use this. It is okay to use the code behind, as long as the code that you're putting in here is view related code. And when it's not, you put it inside a method in your view model and you invoke it there. Okay, just so we're clear on that detail. Okay, but the standard way of actually getting interaction going back and forth is to use what is called a command. So we can go in here and we'll do a binding click command. And I'm trying to remember, do you have the auto code button? One of you is supposed to have an auto code. Yes, Robert, it is. So a command, in order to do the binding, so public I command, what did I call that thing? Click command. And that's probably a bad name because I'm exposing what the thingy that I expect to do. And we will go ahead and include this. So in the box in WPF, you get the I command interface. But WPF out of the box provided no MVVM implementations of I command. Is it legal to call something from a code behind from a view model? Generally, well, I got to be careful how I say this. Yes, you can certainly do that. So there's a couple ways to do that. Like if your view model, say, has an event, your code behind could listen for an event and respond to that as well. In general, though, I try to avoid like passing things like mouse event args down into my view model. Oftentimes my code behind methods will massage the UI objects into something that's not a UI object and pass the needed data down into my view model. Or there could be like there are cases that I've done where the view model, say, raises an event, the code behind watches for it, takes that event and does something with it. That's fine. Called methods or fire commands. Yeah, in general. Hey, coding vibe. I appreciate the raid. So at least in terms of going back and forth, lost my train of thought. So yes, it is valid to do stuff in your code behind from the view model. The one thing that I usually am a stickler about is making sure that you don't put view code in the view model. And view code, I loosely would define as if you're inside of the system Windows namespace or nested below it, you're probably a view class. Probably. There's a handful of exceptions that I don't mind too much, like point or size, or some of the structs are kind of okay. Like it's kind of a bit of a gray area because those things, they're structs. So I can be persuaded to I can be persuaded to let those things flow into the view model. Been a while since I've done client WPF bodies, so I figured I'd pop in. Awesome, great. Searching the visual tree is a bad thing to do in the code behind. So searching the visual tree, usually bad. So the easy option is if I need to, like, for example, if I want to manipulate this text block in my code behind for some reason, like say I want to set the background color of it, the thing that you do is you do an X name on it, and I call it, my text block. And you spell block correctly, because that's important. When you set an X name on it, one of the things that ends up happening inside of this initialize component method that gets generated is it actually will create a backing field for you called my text block. So now you can actually come in here and go my text block and just use it, right? Like I can now go muck with its background if I want. Do I need to hide these calls behind some interface view model I add thing, or can I access the view model itself? I usually just access the view model itself because the view should, in nearly all cases, I have no problem with the view knowing directly about the view model. Like quite often, if I need to do a lot of view model access, I will do something like this, where I go view model and do something like, just so that I don't have to typecast my data context every time I need access to it. It's not a bad thing, but this way I've got a strongly typed thingy. And sometimes you can even do something like this if your data context changes more than once. I mean, sometimes I've done this before too, just so that this property always looks it up rather than just getting assigned. Either one's fine for the view to reach back across. Okay. Okay, so back over to here. So what we are going to need to do then is actually provide an implementation for this click command, because what we've done is separate out the actual part of clicking the button from what should the button do. And in this case, I'm going to declare that the button should change the first name to Robert, because Robert is probably the second coolest first name that you could have. Ish. Now, because there is not a built-in thingy, I am going to go and grab the, let's see, MVVM search, probably near the top. Nope. Community Toolkit. You're welcome, Robert. So you'll note this one, scary warning deprecated, use new name. But again, it's basically the same stuff. They just renamed their NuGet package. Ooh, Mountain Dew. Robert is speaking my language. Robert is speaking my language. So every MVVM library worth its salt comes with some implementation of iCommand. All of the libraries that I like to show off, their built-in one is called relay command. Okay, so we do this, add this, and the relay command at its most simple takes in an action, which usually we just pass it a method to tell it, hey, invoke this method. So just kind of by convention, and this is a Kevinism, not a well-defined thing. I tend to suffix my command properties with command and name their action events starting with on and dropping the command suffix. That's just me. So, and in this case, we're going to say first name becomes Robert, because that is what we declared it to be. Come in here, we're going to launch. Okay. Note to self, we should make the font bigger. Font size, I don't know, 24. Cool. You'll note, because there is hot reload turned on by default, I just edited that without even clicking anything or doing anything in my debugger. It's wonderful. It's kind of like what web developers have had for years. Okay, so I'm going to set a breakpoint inside of my on click, and then we are going to click the button, and our method gets invoked. Huzzah. First name currently is Kevin. We step over. First name is now Robert. We go wonderful. We take a look here, and our UI hasn't updated. Now, people who have been around my channel for a long time immediately know whenever I see somebody saying, hey, my stuff isn't updated, there are two root causes in WPF. If something doesn't update when you see the property change, the two most logical explanations are the property change notification wasn't done, or your data context is wrong. We already talked about data context. What is property change? There is a magical interface called INotifyPropertyChanged. Boom. And this interface has a single member, an event called property changed. And inside of WPF and most MVVM frameworks from Microsoft that use XAML, when you do a binding and it looks at your data context for this property, it actually does a little bit more. If the data context implements the data context instance, if it implements INotifyPropertyChanged, it will actually register, the binding itself will register for this event and say, okay, anytime this property changes, I should go and update my text property, which is great. Because again, if we go back to the idea of testing our view models, that means when I'm writing tests against my view model, what I'm actually doing is writing a test to say, okay, when the click command is invoked, did the first name property change to Robert? Great. My test would pass. The problem is because I didn't validate that the event was there as well, the UI is sitting there going, well, when I checked the property the first time, it was Kevin. No one told me it had ever changed. Why would I just randomly update? right? Because this is just an auto property. There's nothing magical happening here at all. So generally what you will see happen, and this is going to become long form real quick. So this is convert to full property, right? So if we go to full property, so rather than just an auto property, we'll get a lot of stuff in here. Oftentimes what you will see happen is your setter starts to get big and ugly. It starts to be this, and then you end up with, hey, yeah, so, oh, you were so close. I didn't tab it right. Let's see, property. There you go, Copilot. That's the Copilot I love. That's the Copilot I love. Okay. Generally, you'll see something like this. And now if we launch, and we click our button, oh, we hit our breakpoint. We turn off our breakpoint, we let it go. Now it actually updates. Great. That's what we expect, because now when this event fires, the binding that we created right here properly goes, the first name property has changed, everything flows, everything works the way we expect. Now, because the bindings in your view are watching that event, it is important that you don't raise that event too much, because every time that event gets raised, especially if it's raised unnecessarily, like for example, if I were to do that, that's going to end up raising the event 5 times, and really the value has only changed once. So oftentimes what you will see happen in your setter is something more akin to this. If first name is not equal to value, then we'll go through and do all of this work, right? And we start to build up. And you can imagine if you have to do this logic for every single, don't worry, Robert, I've got Mountain Dew here, and this one here has airborne in it. I'm dual fisting it tonight. If you have to do this for every single property that you want to bind to, this gets to be really big, really fast, and kind of obnoxious. So there are, I'm going to skip over showing you all the intermediate steps from prior versions of the library, and we're just going to jump straight into the coolness that is the community MVVM toolkit. So for starters, the observable object. For starters, there is a base class built into the community toolkit called observable object, which is great. And if we go and take a look at this guy, he's got some cool stuff built into it. So one, you will note that he implements the INotifyPropertyChanged. Oh, thank you, Robert. I appreciate it again. And property changing. 7 months. Wow, that's a lot, Robert. So he actually takes care of implementing the interface that our binding wants. And you'll note he has some nice methods in here for, on property changed, and he leverages this caller member name. So we can take all of this stuff and we can just go on property changed. And I'm just going to call this out because this one often surprises people. You'll note that this method takes in a property name string, but it's optional. And the cool part here is this attribute caller member name. If you don't pass a value when you invoke this method, what the compiler will do is it will look and say, okay, who is the caller? It's the first name property. The name of the first name property is first name. And what will actually get compiled is something more like this, which works great. So that is a nice, clever feature. But it also means that if I don't specify that string, if I ever rename this to be, I don't know, first name 2, this will still magically work. And it'll raise the appropriate property because the compiler will automatically update for it, which is great. But we can actually get even better than this because this pattern, again, it means I have to have a field. It means I have to do some checks. I have to assign. I have to raise property change and yada, 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 yada. That's typing. That's a lot of stuff. And we're going to skip over the history. Ignore that. We're going to come back to it in a minute. So you'll note their example here looks remarkably similar. We can actually get really cool. So you'll note we can get a lot smaller than this. So, and I will call out on theirs. They've got a full name property, because occasionally what you want to do is when first name changes, well, you'd want to raise property change for first name. That's a given. But if you've got a composite property like full name, you want to raise property changed on that as well, because those bindings, they don't know anything about. If they're bound to the property full name, unless they get told, hey, full name changed, those bindings don't do anything without being told. And this set property method, this encapsulates the check if the value is different, raise the event if it is. That's all this is doing. But you'll note, we can take all of this logic and we can boil it down to just this. So let's try this, because this is quite frankly awesome. So all of this stuff here, right? Whoop, gone. And the one thing that we do have to do is we do have to make this a partial class. So it's important to note with source generators, what ends up happening is they generate an extra C# file, conceptually, behind the scenes that's going to get compiled with your project. Now, with C#, you can split a class definition across multiple files as long as it's declared as partial. If it's declared as partial, this class definition can be spread across any number of files. And source generators take huge advantage of this. So if you want to use these cool source generator features, you do need to make sure that you make this thing partial. And I believe, if I remember correctly, yeah, you will get a flag here. And this, I thought they had an analyzer for this, but apparently not. This is just the straight up compiler making an argument, because right now the compiler's seen two main window view models, mine and the one from the source generator. And the problem is the source generator one has the word partial and mine doesn't. It's going, that's not right. The other one had partial. Did you miss it? Oh boy. Hence the airborne. I've been talking too much. Okay. We slap this partial on. Now, if we want to look, we can come in here. We can pop open the Community Toolkit source generators. And I believe if we come into here, let's see, observable property generator. It's probably this one. And you'll note, here's a C# file. And we can click on it. And we can see everything that it generated for us. And you'll note, from that first name property, it's actually gone to the effort of, hey, let me create that first name property for you. Hey, let me do the appropriate equality check to see if those two values are different. And then I'm going to generate up a some partial methods. So partial methods will either, if you don't do anything with them in your version of the partial, these things just go away. The compiler ends up dropping them because he goes, nah, they weren't implemented, don't care. But there are these extra magical methods that just show up. So is no longer a method or a property. How do I run additional logic now? So the answer, Justin Bieber, is right here. So on first name changing, so there's a couple on changing methods that give you some injection points. And then there is a on change. So it depends on whether you want to run logic before or after the assignment. So if you want to run something before the field gets assigned, you could do it here. And if you want to run something after, you could do it here. It is worth noting that you don't, at this point, there's no way to like stop the assignment. That's not really a thing. You could like change the value to be something different or reassign back and double do it. Like that's all possible, but there isn't necessarily a way to say stop it if you wanted to do something like that. But that means that over here, if I want to go with private void on, what is it? On first name changing. Why is it not giving me private void? I don't know why I'm not getting IntelliSense. Is that the right? Was that the right name? On first name changing. Oh, I didn't. Here, we're just going to copy this because that way I don't have to think too hard. Paste. Drop the word partial. Boom. And drop the semicolon. Okay, so now that this guy is here, you'll note that this thing is now actually lit up. So if we go here, and you'll note my code down here that's assigning to Robert, I'm assigning to that property, because if I look at this, I've got both a first name field and a first name property, right? Which is pretty slick, that both of them are there. And these are done as incremental generators. All these attributes so similar to PostSharp. Yes, but there's a key difference between these. Is PostSharp did it by manipulating the assembly post-compile. This one is doing it with source generators, which is effectively pre-compile. Small but important difference. And you can see the generated source here, which in my opinion is just a whole heck of a lot nicer. Post-compile stuff with IL weaving is insanely powerful. Insanely powerful. Because PostSharp can cheat. They don't have to do things with like partial class and all that stuff because they're post-compile. Maybe that's why they call it PostSharp. I never thought of that. Interesting philosophical discussion. Okay, so let's fire this up and we can actually see this work. There were build errors. What are my build errors? Yeah. See here, this is the bug. If you get a bunch of these already defines, already contains this duplicate definition stuff. Okay, so pro tip here. Come to the material design project or any of my WPF projects, because I think I've done it to all of them now. Directory build.targets. This is what you want. This target right here. Copy. This is the fix that is going into the WPF thing at some point. Slap it into your CS proj or directory build thing somewhere that's going to be part of your compile. Maybe don't call it material design. Dixie Waddy, right? All that matters is that this target exists. It has to have a unique name, and it has to be called before core compile. Effectively, it's going to strip out the duplicate analyzers because they're added twice. And now we should be able to launch. Oh, hush now. Oh, that's a dip. Let's just rebuild, and hopefully it picks it up. Let's see. Main window already defines a member name on first name changing. What? Why am I being stupid? Why am I being stupid? Blah 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 blah. Oh, I added the word private, and this should have been partial. There we go. So if we come in here and we click, we now got first name changing, Robert. And if we were to look at our first name thing, we can see that the current value is Kevin. So bear in mind, I did changing. This is the one that is before the assignment. And then there's changed, ed, which would be after the assignment, which is pretty slick. So if you want to do any additional logic about changing other stuff or that kind of thing. Now, most of the common use cases where you might want to do additional logic have been handled for you, because the common case where you do extra logic is usually notifying that the command is valid. So for example, I kind of skimmed over this relay command a little bit. I command actually has two things that it does. First, it has a thingy that it can execute. So it has an execute method. And then more importantly, it also has a can execute, right? If we look at this interface, two things. And you'll note the can execute also has an event. This functions very similar to the INotifyPropertyChanged. Once again, all of the commands at WPF, they don't do anything magical by themselves. They go, can I execute? Oh, I can? Okay, let's do it, right? That's it. And if that can execute ever changes later, they don't magically update on their own. So for the relay command, I often do can click, right? So again, just Kevin's naming convention. Private void can click. Oh, not void. This needs to be bool because, you know, it has to tell it. And it will be, you can click only if first name is Kevin. Right? So we'll just limit it. You can click the button once, but once you get to Robert, you've reached the pinnacle of first names, and there is no more clicking involved. Right? So if we fire this guy up, what we should see happen, and I'm gonna kill my breakpoint so that I don't annoy myself, is after I click this, my button should go disabled. But it invoked the, and I'll restart this just to prove a point. It invoked the can click once on startup and said, oh, okay, I'm able to be clicked. Great, enabled. The other, so we can invert this logic here as well. Because if can execute returns false, which it should now because that's the starting value, what it'll end up doing is disabling the relevant control that it's attached to, which typically means control.isEnabled goes to false. I think that's true for every built-in control. IsEnabled goes to false if the command on it, if it's can execute returns false. Now the problem is if this updates later, we want to notify it. And oftentimes you would do that inside of like on one of these changing things. But conveniently, you'll note they've said, oh, hang on, let me help you with that. Rather than you writing code that goes through and says, hey, on the command, call notify can execute change. Because relay command does define a notify can execute change. That's a thing that exists. We can come in here and say, hey, by the way, I would like you to notify on this guy when this property changes, notify that this command should be updated again. All right, so we should be able to go back to here, and then when we click the button, we should see it go disabled. Oh, it's because it wants the generated code for this. If we look at it, it wants something that implements iRelay command, and this is only an I command. So if we make this an iRelay command, that should now work. Oh, and actually, we don't even need property changed anymore. Base class handles all that for us. Our code's going to get real small real fast. We come in here, click, the value has changed, and my button is now disabled because I slapped an attribute on a field. So real quick, this deserves a round of applause for the authors of this library. They did an awesome job, in my opinion. This is absolutely amazingly slick stuff. Again, I'm going to skip over the case where it notifies property change for a composite property. I think we can imagine how that works. This is so slick. So slick. I absolutely love this. The one thing I did want to test real quick, because I'm curious if it handles it. I assume it must. Does it still generate the same property name even if I underscore my field? Oh, it does. Mwah! 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 It handles the default naming schemes that everyone cares about. Huzzah! Okay, one more test. Just because I want to try it. If I do this, does it still generate correctly? Mwah! It works. I love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay, but we can actually go even simpler than this, because this fits on my screen. Even with my zoomed in ridiculous font size, this still fits. But let's go easier. So if we come back here, I'm going to scroll back up. You'll note we had to write a bunch of code for our relay commands, or the command in general. And in reality, most of the time, we don't care to do all this stuff. Like, what I really want to write is this method. All of this other stuff is boilerplate. So let's come over here, right? So you'll note here, this has relay command, greet user command. So that naming scheme that I had mentioned where I like to name things with a command suffix and then my thing tends to drop it, but add the word on. If I'm willing to give up the word on, which I think I'm okay. I'm willing to do this. And I slap this little guy on. what we can do here is we can go whoop, and you'll note I don't need any of this stuff anymore. And if I look here on this, I've got a click command. So if I just write a function and I slap the relay command attribute on top of it, it will go through and build this up for me. This is cool. This is very cool. So let's just confirm that it works. There were build errors. Of course there are build errors. I left that thing sitting there. Let's try again. We can come over here and whoop. Yeah. Now, the one thing I don't know about, oh wow, it has I am curious. I am curious if I can get it to generate something with the can method on it. I kind of want to jump because those docs are big, and I'm not confident I'm not missing something. We'll generate both an, let's see, task method. Yeah, we'll get to async in a minute. That one's cool. I really was hoping this thing would do a... I don't know if this thing supports doing the other case where I really wanted to have a can method too. I was really hoping it did, but maybe we'll check. I didn't read the docs close enough. Additionally, a can execute method can also be specified. It's oh yes. Oh, mwah, mwah, mwah. Okay, this is too slick. So once again, one, read the docs, because apparently read the docs are cool. Blah, 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 blah. This is just showing you how to create a command. That looks like typing. That looks source generators. Relay command attribute. This is what we want. Create user, command, async. We'll do async in a minute. I want can. Oh, so I literally just do that. Oh, that sounds... Well, I didn't even think about looking at properties on the thing. Let's see what's on there. Oh, mwah, mwah, mwah. Include cancel command. Oh, you are. Don't redox and go to Stack Overflow. Oh, yes. That is sadly true. So let's put our can click back. Let's see. Name of can click. And now we should be back to feature parity on where we were a moment ago. So now when I do this guy, click, and it turns it off, which is pretty cool. Now, the other thing that gets really cool is, let's imagine that I want to do an asynchronous method. And I get all crazy, right? And we say, okay, we want to assign it to Robert, but we're not real confident that we want to assign it, so we're gonna wait, a second before we actually do that, because, I'm not actually confident. You'll note what I had to do. I changed my method to async, and I click, and then it changed. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. That is very cool. And you'll note it also supports, real quick, go over the underscore. So C# 8, I think, added the ability to have separators inside of numerics. As long as you like underscores, you can use any character as long as it's an underscore. These, all the underscore does inside of a numeric literal is provide a separator. It has zero semantic meaning. So it just gets dropped, but it is, you can actually, and you could do garbage like this. Those are all equal to 1,000. But yeah, so you shouldn't use them to add confusion. I generally like to use them just to group stuff. And you can arbitrarily group them. This is most helpful if you're doing like binary numbers, because oftentimes you'll want them in groups of 4 or 8 or whatever, or maybe hexadecimal, where you want to group in, again, some power of 2, 2, 4, or whatever. So oftentimes they'll get used in that way in order to show them off. But good call out, Robert. So for people who haven't seen them, that's literally all they are. Underscores in the middle of a numeric have no effect on the generated code and are there simply to make code more readable. So hex groups, binary groups, yeah, very useful for that. I tend to use it anytime I get over 1,000, just as my 1,000 separator, just for clarity, because I've started to learn, even for things like it gets, so even at 10,000, I have to stare at that for a minute just to make sure I've got the right number of digits. Like, my eyes aren't great. I tend to see that many zeros and things just kind of blur together. So, just for what it's worth. So, the other thing these things have, cancellation token. So we can actually get even cooler. And if you spell cancellation token correctly, it'll even find the name for you or get close enough. And I believe on this one, let me double check this guy. Let's go back up to the asynchronous bit. So, as that will be propagated to enable cancellation. So you can actually set something up like this as well. Now, it's worth noting, if you take in a cancellation token, you probably want to trap the operation canceled exception. Most things, especially in the TPL, when that token gets canceled, or if that token gets canceled, most of the time those will propagate up as operation canceled exception. So you oftentimes at the top level command will want to trap this. So if you make an asynchronous command that takes a token, you probably should trap it. The other thing is you want to, if you do take in a token, you want to actually flow that token into derived things that have it. So let's actually make this bigger, 5. And sometimes I'll actually switch this over. There's an overload that takes a time span, and it's a lot nicer. So you'll know that thing flows in there, and then after some time, you'll also note that they have taken care of handling the case where, oh, it's now disabled now. I'm going to actually turn this bit off. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to plus equal a Robert onto the end of all of these. That way we're always changing. But we're always going to... So you'll know on the asynchronous bit, because I think on the stream where I did TPL and WPF before, there was a lot of questions that came up around, well, what happens if you double tap the button and all of that kind of stuff? You'll note it handles it for you. And you'll also note that unlike a lot of the relay command stuff, where before we were using async void because command handlers are technically top level event handlers, or functionally that, with this, we don't have to do that anymore. We can write async methods like real people, like real C# developers. Huzzah, 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 huzzah. Again, more just icing on the cake of mwah, mwah. It's just more better, more better, more better. And if we look here, I believe they had asynchronous commands, enabling and disabling commands we looked at. We already showed that. And then this guy here. So that comment about the duplicate ones, allow concurrent execution. So if we go back here, this guy here should have allow concurrent executions. True. Right? So by default, it doesn't let you go clicky clicky. And most of the time when you have a command, you don't want concurrent executions. Rarely do you want that to be a thing. There's, I think, only 2 apps I can think of, or 2 instances I can think of, where I've generally wanted all of the clicks. and I didn't do something inside the handler to like either disable the command or debounce it or something, right? Rarely do I want it, but I could go bop, 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 bop. And you'll note, as soon as the first one goes in, we get canceled because maybe we want it. And again, we should have probably trapped the operation cancel because now we're probably going to die. Yeah. Now we just crash and die, which isn't great. So if you write an asynchronous one, trap that cancellation one. Yeah, async exceptions, await and rethrow default. Oh, interesting. So if a command is configured to flow exceptions to the task scheduler, but instead will both become available through That's pretty cool. So if you want to actually flow the exceptions up, like for example, if you've got some logging library that's looking for like these unobserved exceptions for logging purposes or similar, that might be a use case where you might want to let those things flow through. I don't think I would probably not turn this on by default. Probably. Because you'll note here, this thing is flowing all exceptions to it, not just cancellation. Like, I kind of wish there was one that says, don't do that. So, and you'll note here, it's, yeah, this is even another cool one, right? So, for example, perhaps you have one button that kicks off like a download, and you want to then, so you say, you know what, while the download is going, I want to have a button that has that allows for canceling it. So here, we're gonna do this. Let's actually do some implementation, right? So pretend like this delay is, you know, do long download. Catch operation canceled exception. So I will call out, you'll note that the exception that was thrown on me a little bit earlier was task canceled exception. Operation canceled exception is the base class of that and is generally what you would catch. So first name plus equals XX. We'll just do space X space when there's a cancel. Okay, and if we go here, whoop, I pop the window out. Not okay. I do not like that. Okay, so let's give you another row. Boom. Let's see. Cancel. Binding. Cancel click command. So you'll note I now have another property on here that's just straight up I can cancel. How about a use case that just breaks the usage of this toolkit? Now that sounds just like me. Okay, so if I go click me and I wait some number of seconds, you'll note Robert shows up. And you'll note my buttons are automatically toggling states for me. I've done nothing. Like, I've just bound to a command. No thinking involved. That's what I wrote, which is awesome. I am now focused on just doing what I care about, right? You'll note this can click, not being used. And if I click and then I cancel, I get the X. Because what's ending up happening is this cancellation command will cancel off this token for me. I wrote no code. Well, I wrote very little code. I wrote the code that's important. The what should the thingy do stuff. And all that boilerplate is gone. Like, I absolutely love things that get rid of boilerplate and make this easy on me. Like, this is absolutely amazing. I love this, love this, love this, love this, love this. One thing I will call out, a lot of their docs pages call out this sample app. And so the sample app in question is a UWP app, and you can see some of this. I was hoping for more. Like, I don't know. It's kind of cool, but like, yeah, it's also UWP, not WPF, and I'm biased and all of that stuff. So maybe at some point I should submit a PR and see if they want an MVVM sample using WPF, because it's great to show off. Great, absolutely amazing to show off. So for what it's worth. And then naturally they have tons of unit tests. Okay, another advanced use case that makes me happy. So you'll note here, we derived from observable object. Right? And most of the time that's fine. It's very common when building out WPF applications to have like a view model base or some sort of base class that you want your view models to derive from, right? All right. But that may not always be the case. Like, there's been a number of cases I've run into where it's like, well, I have to derive from this other like library's object, but I really want to add some properties that are going to be bindable, and I'd kind of like all the observable object goodness, but I can't use it as a base class. And that's kind of obnoxious, because at that point, then what I'm doing is I'm deriving from some other object, and then I have to go back to implementing INotifyPropertyChanged and all that. And that's just yucky. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do that? So if we come down, ignore cancellation, broadcast, don't care. You'll note if I come down here, I've got an attribute called observable object. So if I take that and slap it on here, now, you know, once again, still needs to be partial, and still needs to have appropriate curly braces, because those are a thing, right? You'll know I have no base class, right? If I look at my base object, right? The only members on my base type are from system.object. There is nothing special on me at all. But if I look at my current object, I still have all of my magic, like on property changing. That method that used to exist on my base class has now magically appeared on my current class. So rather than like, it's awesome that they gave us an observable object base class that we could derive our view models from. But now, if we don't want to derive our view models from somebody else's object, or we can't for whatever reason, we don't have to give up that functionality. We can just slap it on right here. And then rather than getting functionality through polymorphism by deriving from a type, hey, we'll just implement that type inside of your partial class. We got you. Not a big deal. We got you. Right? So if we look at observable object generator, this guy here, because you'll note right about now, main window view model, I don't know how many partials I've generated. There's more than one partial for this guy. There's a lot of partials out here. So you'll note it went through and it's like, I got you. I'll generate INotifyPropertyChanged, property changing. I'll go through and I'll generate all of the members that would have existed on observable object. So like the on property changed, the one that took in, where is it? Let's see. There's all the set property methods. Oh, I guess it didn't need an on property changed. Oh, there it is. There it is. There's the caller member name one with all of that stuff built in. And away we go. And it just gened it all for us. And it works. And we can append Roberts to Kevin's. And we can cancel adding Roberts because sometimes maybe one Robert is enough. Who am I kidding? We need at least two. And all of that from an attribute. Now, they also have a couple other ones on here for INotifyPropertyChanged. So if you just want the INotifyPropertyChanged bits added on to your class, it's like, I could implement INotifyPropertyChanged myself, or I could have a source generator do it for me. Like, I used to teach people how to implement INotifyPropertyChanged. I don't think I'm going to anymore. I think I'm going to tell them reference the library and just slap the attribute on your class and call it a day. Because you could do it, maybe mess it up, or source generator could do it right the first time. I don't know about you. Seems pretty good to me. Seems really good to me. Okay, pub sub stuff. Okay, so the other thing that often crops up inside of MVVM libraries that quickly comes about is figuring out, how do I communicate between my view models? So, for example, it is very common to say, well, maybe I've got like a service, like when I save a user to my database, I want to pop up a little notification thing, or maybe when I receive a push notification, I want to like increment an indicator or something. And the question comes, okay, I kind of have like the binding and commands to go between my view and my view model, but what about like when view model A wants to talk to view model B? Do they need to have a reference to each other, and how do I get that communication to flow? So built into the library, and I think one of the things that blog post calls out is this library is set up very a la carte style. Take what you want, use the bits that you want. If you don't need it, don't use it. No harm, no foul. Everyone's happy, right? You can take as much of this library as you want. But the easy way to go about doing this is with the iMessenger. Messenger. Boom. Right? This guy. And this guy here comes with all kinds of fun stuff for either registering for a message, or sending a message, receiving a message, or unregistering from it. And the idea here with messages is messages are sent and typically keyed by type. So for example, if I wanted to send say a user logged in message, what I might do is a public record, because I might use a record class, user logged in, and that might have a string username, right? So the message itself is generally keyed on type, and then the data inside of that class is the data that might go with it. So on one side, I might messenger register for user logged in. I want to register myself for this message, right? And then, somewhere else in the app, we might have a messenger send new user logged in, I don't know, Jared, because that's another name that randomly came to my head. All right, so in one location we register for the message, in another location we send it, and these two locations could be disparate, completely unrelated to each other. As long as they're getting the same iMessenger instance, either from DI or from one of the static properties I'll show you in a second, you're gold. Right? Weak events seem to be slower than normal events. Is it okay to build a large program on them? Yes. Ish. It is worth noting, and they actually call it out here. So if you are on like MVVM Lite, your overhead for those events is like 52 milliseconds every time you post one, which is definitely slower, because the big difference here is when you post an event. So a regular C# event is just what's called a multicast delegate. Effectively, you can think of it as a list of delegates, hence the multicast part. And when that event is raised, all of those delegates on the invocation list just get invoked and goes bing, 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 fires them all off. And that's quick. That's literally jump to method, invoke, done. Whereas for this, there's a lookup that has to happen, because the messenger has to keep a mapping of message types to recipients. And so rather than just like boom, 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 walking down a list, it has to do a lookup, get a list, and then go down it. So there is a little bit of overhead with it. And there are two messengers built inside of the library, the weak reference one and the strong reference one. So you'll note with this new library, if you're going with the weak reference one, if you're coming from MVVM Lite, you'll note there's a significant difference between the old one and the new one. We're down to 7 milliseconds. So if you're building a large app on them, you're going to gain a performance thing straight up. However, if you are able to appropriately register and unregister, it may be worth considering using the strong reference manager. Because the strong reference manager is a bit faster. So just to be aware. But if you have the strong reference manager, as the name implies, it's going to maintain a strong reference to everyone who registers. And because these messengers are usually singleton, effectively, they could keep objects alive much longer than they should be. So if you are able to appropriately unregister, go ahead and use the strong reference manager. If you are not able to appropriately unregister, you probably want to consider the weak reference manager, because there is a little bit of overhead with the weak references, right? Because even in C#, when you get a weak reference to something, there's that is alive check that has to be done first, because before it can invoke a weak reference, it has to first resolve it and go, are you still a thing or are you dead? Oh, you're still alive? Okay, now I invoke. So one, I would say update to this library, because you'll know the key thing here, 0 allocations in this latest version. 0. Which is absolutely insane in my opinion. Absolutely insane. This is incredibly cool. There's some deep documentation in here for getting access to this dependent handle and the low-level work that went into making this thing possible. So that is definitely worth a read. But 0 allocation. Like, profile most of your code and see how hard it is to get down to 0 allocation. That is impressive to me. That is very, very impressive. And the 0 allocation is largely how they're getting so much performance out of this. Because if there are no allocations, the garbage collector doesn't need to run, and the garbage collector slows everything down. So, but yes, they did publish all their benchmarks, and this is the key part here of how much got allocated. Answer, almost nothing. Yeah, because you'll note the benchmark was 4 different messages, 1,000 times to 100 recipients. Effectively trying to bloat this as much as possible. And in my opinion, that's pretty good. That is really, really good, especially comparing against effectively a lot of the other common ones. The fact that the MAUI one is so far down here just makes me cry. MAUI, just adopt this library and stop doing whatever it is you're doing. Okay, but this is once again typing and hard. And the other thing I will call out is, unlike MVVM Lite, which let you get away with basically this exact signature, this one here, you'll note when you register, it explicitly wants the instance here to be an I recipient of the message type. So in order for this to work, this guy has to be an I recipient of user logged in. And the I recipient interface has a method for receive that gets invoked when the message is received. So remember, this code is off somewhere else in our app. When this thing calls send, everyone who's registered for this message has their receive message invoked, where they get this same instance, and this instance can carry along whatever data you want, right? You can allocate a message that's tiny, like this, or you could have it be a big object or whatever. Whatever is relevant for your message, and it flows through. But because source generators are cool, yeah, so they show doing all of this stuff. This guy here, I believe. Oh, was there not? Did I misunderstand? I thought there was a source generator to make this even easier. Oh, register recipient explicitly. Oh, I must have missed it. Thought there was a... Oh, observable recipient. This is what I was looking at. This guy here. We go here and slap this guy on. Come over here and we go, show me this one. This guy down here. Oh, this isn't, oh, I misunderstood what this guy was used for. This guy is used for something slightly different. I misunderstood the observable. This is for broadcast. I misunderstood. Okay, I lied. I thought they had a source generator for generating up the registrations of this, but apparently not. Apparently not. So what I tend to do inside of these guys, though, and I think I showed this back on the talk that I did with, go back. If I look, if I go here and look at, what is it? This one here with the generic host. For anybody who's interested. Listening to myself talk. There's too much me. In this guy here, I had shown off actually registering up the DI container with the generic host. So these guys here, nope, that's not what I wanted. I wanted that. So this guy here, you'll note both of the messengers do have a default property that you can get access to and pull these things up. And I think, yeah, inside of the observable object, you do get this messenger property that you are able to go and powwow with. Now, I don't remember this guy. I don't believe, where does he get set? I don't know if he gets set or if I'm required to set him. I think I'm required to set him. So we're going to do that for the moment. And I think, if I recall correctly, that guy's going to be null. Let me double check this. Yeah, he's null. So the way you end up actually getting this guy populated is like this. I'm going to move this into a different method just to change it. Private void foo. That sounds great. Foo, do your thing. Okay. Let's see. This. Oh. Okay. So the way you populate this, it depends. If you are deriving from observable object rather than using the attribute. So if we do this, we change this guy back to observable object. Boom. Right? So we still have messenger, and if we jump to it, we'll end up seeing. Let's turn you off too, just to make sure that it goes away. Oh. Observable recipient. There. Happy? Good. Because observable recipient derives from observable object. Okay. So if you derive from observable recipient, you will note that there is two protected constructors on the base class. One that takes in an iMessenger instance. So if you're using DI, this is what you will get. If you are not using DI, it will fall back to using the weak reference manager. Simply because this is the least likely one to hose you. You might take a small performance hit, but if you don't unregister, it doesn't hurt you. Right? It'll still work. We'll go from 4 milliseconds to 7 milliseconds. We'll be 3 milliseconds slower. We won't like ourselves as much, but it will be a little bit nicer. Which means in our class, what we probably want to do is this. So if you're doing any sort of DI, you will want to make sure that you have a constructor that takes in the messenger and you explicitly pass it through. If you are doing it with the attribute, what this ends up being a little bit easier, because then rather than having a base class that you're playing with, you still want a constructor that takes in the messenger, but you want to what's your problem? But you then go through and assign it yourself, right? And set it up. And if you want to fall back to, say, the weak reference manager default property, that's fine. But if you're using DI, I would suggest registering it up here. Now, if you, just going back a little bit to your question, Justin Bieber, about is it okay to build a large app on this? And you do not have to always just use the static ones. So you can, in some slightly more advanced cases, and I've done this a handful of times, like if I have a parent object that contains a list of children thingies, and I want those children to notify me of stuff, you can create up your own messenger instance that you pass to all of the children, and then you've kind of isolated that message flow to, it's not going to everybody. I'm not going to get the DI messenger, that's the global level one, for example. I'm going to end up getting almost like a scoped instance or similar of what this one is going to be. So you can set it up that way such that you could do it. You could also register it as scoped in your DI container and fun things there. But in the case where you've got like a parent with a bunch of children, that might be a case where you might say, you know what, I'm going to use assuming I can spell, I'm going to create my own, strong reference manager and just use that one for, this small subset of my app. Because, in this case, if it's, a parent object with a list of children, I know when the children are going in and out of scope. I know when they're being removed from the list. I'll unregister them. Everything will be fine, right? In those cases, it's like, oh, okay, I've got a very predefined lifetime. I know what I'm doing. I can clean all of that stuff up. So in those cases, I think it's perfectly fine to do it. But again, I absolutely adore all of these source generators. And these source generators are fast, too. So they are built, I've done streams in the past about building source generators, and I should do another one. These are using the newer source generator APIs called incremental source generators. So they go fast, they go as you're typing. So you'll note in some of these cases, I haven't even hit save, and I've already got the source generated. So one, the code behind the generators that these guys have written is very efficient and very performant, for one. So that's awesome as well. But then they're leveraging the newer source generator API to be even more performant, which is just, it's cookies on top of frosting on top of Mountain Dew, which just makes me so happy. They do have some fancy collection bits, and they're cool and very performant. The only thing that's a little yuckier is they aren't, the way that they show them off is inside of UWP app using UWP controls, which is like, great. I'm happy. They're slightly more performant collections to play with. Huzzah. Yay. Like they're great, but I don't see. I will probably leverage some of these for doing it because they've got this nice bit showing here, which is great. Specifically when doing grouped items, but like I can count the number of times I've done grouping on my items on probably without taking my shoes off. So it's useful, not a lot. Let's see. Diagnostics with guard clauses, great. .NET 6 support for native ints, which is cool. I completely approve. Let's see, did I miss anything? Was there anything else that was really cool in here? Messenger, view model composition with attributes, which is awesome because now you can like derive from your database type or whatever you need to be. Oh, there is broadcast, which this is a feature that's both good and bad. In WPF, you can make all the same beautiful animated controllers as UWP, except for acrylic controllers. Yes-ish. So you could build a lot of controls in WPF. There's a handful of things when it comes to being able to do some rendering and performance that the WinRT, which is what UWP and WinUI 3 are based on, are just going to win at. Because they get to take advantage of some extra performance bits that don't exist in WPF. So functionally, yes, there's nothing stopping you from building like a contacts style control like what they have here. There's nothing stopping you from building this in WPF. There's not necessarily a great what is the word? It starts with a C. I'm blanking on the name. It's going to come to me later and I'll just shout it out randomly. This kind of like being able to zoom out on the groups and bounce between them, that control there, there's not built-in controls for that kind of stuff, which is the other kind of yucky part. Whereas UWP, that control comes in the box. It's like, dang nabbit. It'd be nice to have something. But I also, again, I do group collections so little, it's not that big of a deal. But yes, you could, from a functional perspective, you could absolutely build this in WPF. There's just some rendering performance stuff that you'll never be able to match them with. But yeah, functionally, you can totally do it. Broadcast. That's what we're looking at. So the one thing that is sometimes handy is, and this is also a feature I don't use a lot because it kind of comes back to the question about, is it good to have something warning you about it? You can, in the generated stuff, create this notify property change recipients, this broadcast idea where it will automatically push out notifications when the property changes. I have very seldom used this feature, even inside of MVVM Lite, because it existed there as well. And it was cool, but oftentimes what I found is if you have code that's highly reliant on a particular property changing, it's been rare to me that I've had something relying on a property change. And it's usually, the only time this has made sense to me is in that like parent with a list of children type situation where, you know, maybe I'm building like on my budgeting application where I've got a list of line items for a receipt, and as the dollar amounts in each of those change, I want to update a total in the parent, right? Something to that effect. So in those situations, you know, maybe I'm watching an amount property and I want those changes broadcast up to my parent. That's one of the few times I have ever needed something like this. So it's kind of rare to use, but once again, you slap an attribute on it, it auto-gens the code for you, and everyone's happy. Which is just absolutely amazing. Let's see, cancellation support for commands, all of that jazz, observable properties, commands. I think we covered everything. I think this is everything in the toolkit. So hopefully that was helpful to people. Like I said, my opinion, this is easily going to be my new go-to for all MVVM work, WPF or otherwise, simply because of how awesome this is. And the performance benchmarks of it are absolutely unreal. Specifically Sergio, this guy in particular, if you want to follow him on Twitter or similar, he posts some amazing performance benchmarks of the work that he's doing. it is impressive to me the speed performance that he can squeeze out of some of this code. So if you want some interesting stuff, you know what? Here, I'll drop a link. Come on, load GitHub. Sergio. Yeah. Absolutely impressive developer. Amazing with some of the performance benchmarks. Okay, I think with that, I am probably going to cut out a little early. We'll call this me being at 90%, and what we're gonna cut out 10% early. I think that's how I'm gonna pitch it. That way it flows nicely. So with that, thank you very much for everyone coming out. Hopefully that's, like I said, helpful to everyone. We will be back again next week. There's a small chance I may end up throwing a bonus stream in at some point. There's a couple of extra videos I might make. So if you aren't tracking my YouTube, I've got a couple videos that I think I may make off stream just because I want to script them a little more. So if you're interested, follow them there, because those ones will end up getting posted to YouTube, which is more or less my archive for all videos, so that I don't have to track them. But I will see everyone next week. Happy coding.